Section 4, Creating an Asteroids Game. So, in Section 4, we will be creating an asteroid style game. So this is going to be another 2D style game, similar to the Flappy Bird one. So if you've ever played asteroids before, you probably know what I'm talking about. You basically play with a little spaceship and you go around shooting lasers at different meteors or asteroids, and when they explode, you actually get points for destroying them. So we're going to follow along on how to actually create that style game with this section. And the first video is going to be scripting all around movement and implementing particle effects. Next is camera damping, creating prefabs, and then the shooting script. Following that is using an array and loop to instantiate prefabs. Following that, player def after loss of lives, which is about 3, unity lists, and then asteroid destruction. Then finally, incrementing the score and adding sound effects. So here we go with video 1, scripting all around movement and implementing particle effects. So in this video, we will be using a conditional to enable movement in more than one direction. We're going to be going over serializing fields and then Unity's particle system. So our spaceship right now should have the ability to propel forward and also turn left and right. Before in our Flappy Bird game, we only had one direction put their input into and direct the bird object to go up direction. However, in this case, we want the spaceship to move forward and then be able to turn left and also right. So unlike before when we had just one type of player input, we must use a conditional along with booleans to register the button the player is pressing in order to determine which way to go. So the conditional has to take in a couple of different buttons. We will also look at the built-in particle systems in Unity to create a thruster that emits particles each time our player presses the key to launch forward. So let's go a little bit faster this time, since you should know how to set up a basic scene. So as of right now, I have my Unity editor open and I'm about to create a new game called Asteroids. So hit Create Project, and now our Asteroids game should be ready for editing. So I'm going to go ahead right now and import a couple of asset packages that I have. Feel free to go find your own asset packages if you would like, or any other objects that you would like to use as sprites, and try to set up your scene similarly to how we did with the Flappy Bird game. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my scene right now. Okay, so I just finished up my scene right here. So I'm just going to show you what I have so far, and if you would like to, you can go ahead and take on my design. So I have a background right here, and a couple of planets just floating around. I have the sun, and I also have a couple of asteroids that we are going to be using later. So I set these up and adjusted the color of the sprite. So I have a red asteroid, a green one, and a yellow one. And on top of this, I also have the player object right over here, which is a spaceship. So this is what the player is going to be controlling. So our first step into getting some player movement is that we have to create a player controller script. So go into the player, hit add component, and now let's type in player controller, and let's hit create and add. So now this player controller should be on your player object. So let's open it up for editing. Okay, so I'm going to go over something here called private variables. So a private variable is pretty much a variable that you cannot access within the editor. The reason why you would want to hide some variables is because it can be considered a lot better practice to do so. It also might actually enhance performance of the game as well. So it's really considered best practice to hide variables with private variables at times. So in here, we are actually going to be creating a private variable to reach and grab the rigid body. So we're going to create private rigid body 2D, and then call this RBody again. And what we want to do is, in order to grab the rigid body component with a private variable, is we basically have to get the player object, and then we have to use get component. So how do we assign a variable again? Initialize a variable. We would actually have to do this in the start method. So inside the start method, we're going to initialize the RBody variable and set that equal to this.gameObject.getComponent and then rigidbody2D. Now that we have this, let's go back over to our editor and make a couple of changes to our player game object. So we have to add the rigid body component. So let's go ahead and do that. Rigid body 2D, add that, and now what we need to do is we need to make one little change here to the gravity scale. So when we change the gravity scale, this actually will allow our object not to fall down. And since our object is technically in space, we want to give it sort of a feeling of floating. So let's change the gravity scale to 0. And let's also create an angular drag of 500. So this should actually allow our object, like when it's actually pushing forward after we have the thruster, after we enable the thruster, to actually have the player game object move through space and actually create a little bit of a drag, like the spaceship's being pulled back a little bit, like how it would be in space. So it's actually kind of slowing it down a bit. Let's go back to our script, and let's also go into the update function. So now that we're in the update function, we need to create a couple of booleans to tell us what button is being pressed. So there are a couple of ways how to do this, but I'm going to show you how to do this by assigning a key code to a boolean. So type in bool go forward equals input dot get key code dot w. Now let's create two more bools in a similar manner. Turn left, and then we'll pass that one the key code of A. Now let's do turn right. So what these booleans are technically doing is they will be returning true if that key has been pressed. So this is basically assigning the certain key code to the boolean directly. So now with that, let's go ahead and create our conditional. So we can just call the boolean right here, and we don't have to say equals true, because it's already going to be set to true if it is. And then what we are going to do is RBody.addForce, and then we want to make the player game object actually go up. So we're going to do this.transform.up. Then multiply that by -2. And now following this, we actually want to take the rotation of the player game object in order to make it turn left. So we're not actually going to add force any longer to the player game object into a certain direction, but we're actually going to have it torque, or basically turn at a certain pace in a certain direction. So add an else if, and in here, we'll pass it turn left. And we want rigid body to torque in the left direction, or in this part here, the positive part of the, or in a positive direction. So what we want to do here is RBody.addTorque, and then pass it the number 500, because we actually want it to kind of go around in a circle, going the positive way. However, if we're going to have it turn right, we want it to go the other way in this case. So else if turn right, RBody.addTorque 500. So this is going to make it turn around in the proper way in a circle. So let's go ahead and let's see how this looks. So now, as you can see, I'm pressing right now the D key, and my spaceship's turning right. And now I'm pressing the A key, and my spaceship is turning left. So now let's press up, and now you can actually kind of see like that bit of resistance on it because of that angular drag. And this here is actually kind of giving us a little bit of resistance, like how it would kind of look like if we were floating outside in space. And the torque is going a little bit slower. You could speed this up if you want to. I kind of like this though. It kind of has a bit more of a realistic effect to it. Okay, cool. So save your scene. And let's hop back into our editor in MonoDevelop. So I'm going to go over something here called a particle system. And I'm also going to go over something called a serialized field. So when you want to serialize a field, it's normally done for a private variable. A serialized field will actually allow you to still access the private variable in the editor. However, the variable itself is still a private variable. So this is actually a very useful tool, a very useful method of actually still being able to access private variables in the editor if you still want to use and hide data using the private variable itself. So we'll call a serialized field, and then we'll do private particle system flares. So before we go any further, we have to start creating our particle system. So obviously, as soon as our spaceship's taking off, we want to have a little bit of a trail following in back of it to give it the effect of it's actually lifting off or going forward. So we'll create a particle system in order to do this. So click on your player, and let's create a particle system, and we'll have it as a child. So there are a couple of ways that you could do this. You can actually see the particle effects right over here in the scene view, and when you start creating them, you can see how they look. So let's go ahead and just move the rotation down a bit to actually get our particle effect to show. And what we are going to do is make a couple of changes to it here in the editor. So the first thing to do is let's change the emission rate over time to about 20, so we have a lot more particles coming through. We'll have our rate of distance as 3. Scroll down and expand the box for shape, and instead of cone, select box. So now we have a bit more of a propulsion looking sort of effect, and this is kind of what we want. Let's just modify the box X, Y, and Z values. Change box X to 0, box Y to 5, and then box Z to 0 as well. Now we should be ready to add a little bit of color to this. So scroll on down and try to look for color over lifetime and check that box. So we're going to modify the color here. Hit the bar, and here's where we are going to assign a couple of different colors to it to change as the particles are flowing forward. So the type of effect that I would like to have is in the beginning, click on the box, and what you would want to have is a more red effect, and then just take these here at the end. Actually, just leave them right here. What you can do is actually duplicate these. And what you can do is actually duplicate these by actually clicking right next to the tag that you want to duplicate and to add more color to. So we're going to create a red, and then we're going to have this gradually kind of go to a yellow. So add that, more of a darker yellow, create another one right over here, and we'll create a lighter yellow. And actually over here, maybe I'll make this here more of like an orange. A little bit more of like an orange, like over here. There we go. Okay, so this particle effect looks pretty good. You have pretty much the color transition happening over time. If you would like to, you can actually move this down just a bit. So it looks like it's actually coming out of the rocket. So I just had to adjust the box values. For some reason, those just went back to being 1, 1, 1. So you want to have them 0, 5, and 0 yet again. So this is basically what the finished particle effect should look like. So save your scene, and we just need one more thing to fix up here, and this is the play on awake. So a lot of these different components that are adding some sort of effect, may it be a particle effect, for example here, are actually automatically put on play on awake. So deselect that, so this won't play when we start our game up. And for here, you can actually just press stop the simulation of the particle effect. So let's go back to our player controller script. And what we need to do now is in code, we need to allow for the particles to be emitted. So we're going to take our private particle system variable right over here, flares, and we want each time for when the player hits the forward button to have the flares actually be emitted. So we're going to hit flares, type in flares dot emit, and then we just have to pass in a number of how many particles to really be emitted. So for right now, we'll just do 1. So they'll emit about a value of 1 for the particles. So go over to your player, and as you may have actually noticed with the player controller script, now you can actually pass in variable. You can actually pass in the particle systems into this private variable. So go ahead and drag and drop that in there, and let's see how this looks. Okay, So now we have our flares being emitted each time we hit forward, and they're firing at the back part of the ship. If you hold down the forward button, then actually the flares are emitted constantly. Alright, so this was pretty cool to do.